Welcome back to another video. Another one. Another one. Another one. Another one. Another one. All right, welcome back to another video. What we're going to be talking about today is one of my favorite topics. We are going to be talking about support and resistance, first of all, and volume profile. And to keep it simple, and we're going to try to keep this video way shorter than the other ones because this doesn't need to be that complicated. In fact, nothing I've done so far is that complicated, I feel like. If it is, drop a comment down below. Let me know what it is that you're confused about, so that I can help you out. If you need a little bit more help, you can schedule a one-on-one with me with the links in the description, or you can join my Discord. I'm looking to build a community of people who want to help each other. With that being said, okay, we're going to be talking about support and resistance today and volume profile. And all these two things is basically support and resistance shows you where potential boss fights can be stepping in at. And volume profile just shows you where potential boss fights could be lying at. Okay, big difference between the two, okay? You'll see how once we go over both of them. Something I do want to talk about, though, is I want to refer back to, I think it was the second or third video when we had started talking about boss fights and how the boss fights in this game will purposely let all of the other players come into the boss fight room, and the boss fight knows that like these players can't really do anything to him. Now, keep in mind, it doesn't mean that the players can't defeat the boss, right? The players can defeat the boss. They just need a overwhelming amount of force or help behind them. However, let's just say the boss is like extremely cocky because he's like that powerful. He's like Madara. Imagine Madara when like Madara pulled up on all the sages and like how cocky he was. Like nobody was able to hang with Madara, right? But just like Madara, he was eventually able to get defeated. That was some straight BS. He was eventually able to be defeated by Naruto and all of the other Happy Tree friends, right? So that's kind of how the bosses move in this game of trading. They move like Madara. They have his attitude. We'll just say that, okay? And I'm going to show you context-wise how that is. We can see that through support and resistance, and we can see where we can see where the boss rooms are at using the volume profile. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's jump into MS Paint, and I want to visually show you what this will look like, and then I will show you what support and resistance looks like on a chart. All right, so we're going to keep this real short, sweet, and simple. When we have a narrative, so in this example, we're going to be doing a hero narrative. And if you haven't been around, all a hero narrative is a overwhelming amount of buying power. In trading terms, it is an overwhelming amount of buying power. The majority is going up, okay? So in this example, we are going to be doing a hero narrative and what support and resistance looks like on it. So in a hero narrative, we have the uptrend, right? It consists of higher highs and higher lows, like we discussed. Underneath those higher lows are the spawn points of buyers. In video game terms, those are the spawn points of our heroes, looking to move the story upwards, hence it going up in the first place, okay? Does that make sense? Now, above our higher highs in a uptrend, these are the spawn points of the villains. In trading terms, these are where sellers step in at. So if heroes step in an uptrend, if heroes step in below, and villains step in up high, what do you think it means when this happens? What do you think it means when this happens? So, a group of heroes have spawned in, They then looked to move price up, and they were immediately rejected by a group of sellers stepping in and pushing them back down. Then another group of buyers spawned in. They then looked to move price back up again, but this time something different happened. They were rejected underneath that same area where they had gotten pushed down from before. They then looked to go back up there again, and once again, they are met with the same reaction. And every time now that they get back to that same area, they just cannot get above it for whatever reason. So despite all their best efforts, they have truly shown us that they want to attempt to move the narrative and the story up. They have all the power they need. They've shown us that they have all the power, but for whatever reason, they just cannot get past this one group of villains. Let me tell you what this is and what is happening here. What this group of buyers have ran into is something known as resistance. They have ran into an area of resistance, okay? And all that means is that the group of villains are resisting the heroes coming above that certain point in time at that certain level. That is why it's called resistance. They are resisting, okay? They are showing resistance. They have set up a forefront and they're not letting those heroes get by. That is what that means. So now that you know that, let's look at it from the narrative of an overall selling narrative. So before we were looking at a buying narrative, now let's look at a selling narrative. So in a selling narrative, like we discussed, a selling narrative consists of lower lows where buyers exist at, and it consists of lower highs where sellers exist at. In other words, the lower lows are where our heroes are, and the lower highs are where our villains are in the narrative of a villain downtrend. Okay, so we have this lower low here, this lower low here, this lower low here, this lower low here, and this lower low here, and this one currently forming, but we're not going to mark that one up yet. So at all of these lower lows, those are where our heroes are. At these lower highs, these are where our villains are. Okay, so what do you think it means when this happens? What do you think it means when this happens? Well, first of all, we have to look at the context, right? Let's read what just happened here. The villains, well, let's get a different color. The villains brought the narrative down. A group of heroes then set up a spawn point at this moment in time. Let's get a better color. A group of heroes then set up a spawn point at this moment in time. What they then did was drive the narrative back up, and they were immediately rejected by a new spawn of villains. As those villains push the narrative back down, those group of heroes that stepped in earlier stop them from moving any lower past their spawn point, and instead they turn the narrative back around. And now every time that the villains push them back to that original spawn point, they just aren't able to push the heroes underneath that spawn point. And they should be able to do that, right? Because this is a narrative in favor of the villains. So why aren't they able to push these heroes underneath this spawn point? What this is support. This is known as support. So what we are seeing is the heroes have found the support they needed from some kind of ally to keep the narrative above this point in time, despite the overall narrative favoring the villains. The narrative is favoring the villains, but at this specific point in time, the heroes have found the support they need from an ally, from a very strong ally, to keep the narrative above this spawn point. Does that make sense? Real easy stuff to absorb, right? Okay, So now, who exactly is stepping in to support and resist the narrative? Who could be strong enough to do that? Well, if you remember back, I think in the third or second video, me talking about a boss fight and the boss allowing players to come into the room, this is what that is. The only persons or person capable of supporting and going against the narrative is a overwhelming force within the game. And in the game of trading, this overwhelming force, 9 times out of 10, is something we like to call a market maker. However, so we don't confuse you, we're going to call it something else. The only other person that can support this spawn point and go against the narrative despite it favoring the villains is a boss battle on the side of the heroes. So a hero boss battle, a boss battle is remember what I said, a boss battle is a player itself, right? The reason it's called a boss battle because it is stronger than me and you. Does that make sense? But it is a player itself. It just has more of an influence over the narrative than me or you do, or the collective of all of us. So the only thing capable of supporting this spawn point here is, despite it being in favor of the villains, is a boss battle that has spawned in at that level, at that spawn point there, where despite every time the villains bring it down, they just can't seem to get past it. Does that make sense? Real easy to absorb, okay? So now let's look at it from the perspective of an overall hero uptrend. So here we have resistance. Price is being resisted. The reason this resistance is being resisted here, let me get a better color. The reason these heroes are being resisted here, despite their best efforts, is because a boss battle in favor of the villains has spawned in here, has spawned in right here at that point where those heroes are trying to get above, but they just can't seem to do it. Despite the narrative, the overall narrative being in favor of the heroes, they cannot get past this certain villain camp. That is because a overwhelming force has spawned in on the villain side. So now this spawn point becomes resistance to those heroes. Does that make sense? Now, keep in mind, the boss battle himself, he is a player and he can be defeated. In order to defeat this boss battle that stepped in here and decided to help these villains, these heroes would need an overwhelming amount of force to push past that boss that spawned in there. And I mean an overwhelming amount of force, okay? Same for the opposite. If the overall narrative is in favor of the villains, but then all of a sudden the villains cannot push the narrative down anymore, and a hero boss battle has spawned in, it is not impossible for these villains to get below that hero boss battle. They will just need an overwhelming amount of villain force. Does that make sense? That is the easiest thing we have learned about this entire time. So I hope that makes sense, right? So now that I hope you've been taking notes and drawing up these sketches yourself. Okay. Well, how do I take notes? Dude, literally just write down what it is I'm writing down and what it is I'm saying. And then after you write it down and you've drawn it out, just keep reading it to yourself and keep looking at it and then go onto a chart and try to find it. Okay. So now I'm about to tell you how to find both of these things on a chart, starting with the overall narrative being a trend going up, but then all of a sudden a villain boss battle steps in. Okay. So this is literally the perfect example. This is a live chart. In fact, this is the daily chart. So since this is happening on the daily chart, it holds more weight, meaning the moves are going to be a lot heavier if we go down to a smaller time frame. Okay. So what we see here on the daily chart is a overall move going up, right? We then see a group of villains step in and then try to move the narrative down, but then they are stopped by a group. They are stopped by a group of heroes. The heroes then begin to push the narrative in the other direction, but the heroes aren't able to get back above that villain spawn point. And instead, every time they try to come above that area now where they originally got rejected from, where they originally met resistance, they just cannot do it. They just cannot get above that area where they are getting met with resistance. So what we are seeing here at this camp here, let me change the color of the line so you can see it a little bit better. So at this villain camp here, so this villain camp right here, this movement up, this higher high, at this villain camp, a villain boss battle has stepped in and they are applying resistance to the heroes despite, listen to what I'm saying, despite the narrative being in favor of the heroes. So despite the narrative being in favor of the heroes, this villain boss battle, who is an overwhelming force, has spawned in and is applying resistance and pressure to the heroes. And the reason he is doing that is because he is looking to change the narrative from an overall hero uptrend to now a villain downtrend, right? Because he is a villain boss battle. He wants it to go down. So he is using his overwhelming force and powers to do that to the heroes. Now, like I said before, the boss battle is a player himself. He can be defeated. It would just take an overwhelming amount of hero power to explode or push past this villain boss battle here. I can't play it forward because this is literally happening in real time, okay? But that is what is happening here. And as you see, when the heroes actually got back to that original point where they got met with that resistance, so that original villain spawn, the original villain spawn point, when they got back to it, they touched it and they immediately got pushed away. And this isn't no like baby push away like this here. They got sunk. Like they got dunked on, bro. They got dunked on the moment they touched that spawn point, because that is where that overwhelming force is at. It is that villain boss battle. And once again, he can be defeated. It just takes an overwhelming amount of power. So now that we understand what it is that looks like and how to find it, so does that make sense? So resistance is just an area where, despite the narrative being in favor of a hero or a villain, despite the narrative being in their favor, they just cannot move price past a certain point where they are supposed to be able to move it past. That is because they are being met with resistance. So this is the original spawn point here. This is resistance. But this here is also a form of resistance. Why is this resistance? Because the heroes move up and then they get pushed down. And then they try to move back to that area. They aren't able to get above it, and then they get pushed down. And then they touch that area. So they touch that area where they originally got rejected from here. They touch it again, and look at the immediate reaction the moment they touch it. They weren't even able to get a candle to close past that point. They immediately get pushed away. So this was resistance here. So this here at one point in time was also a boss battle who had spawned in here and was keeping these heroes from coming up past this point. Does that make sense? He spawned in on the villain enemy team. How do we know that? Because these heroes are supposed to be able to get past that point. How do we know they're supposed to be able to get past that point? Because the overall narrative is in their favor. They've been winning the whole time. And all of a sudden now, they're struggling to get past a certain point. It's because a bigger player has stepped into the game. Now, like I said before, the boss battle is a player himself. He can be defeated. We see it happen here. They immediately get rejected off of that area, right? But then the heroes come back down and set up camp. And then look at this explosion. Hero candle after hero candle after hero candle. There is no villain candles in between this amount of time. It doesn't mean that there can't be, but this is important context. Look at this explosion of pure hero power that it took to get past that boss battle. Do you see that? And they didn't get pushed away until they got met with that original boss battle who had stepped in. And then they got dunked on by that guy. But they could set up camp down here. They could set up camp down here. And once again, they could take that guy out with another explosive amount of power. Does that make sense? Okay. So now that you understand that, we've looked at it from the narrative of an overall hero uptrend. Let's look at it from the narrative of an overall downtrend. So here we have an overall downtrend. We can visually see that this is going down, right? We can all agree that this is going down. Well, if we zoom in here, and we don't even need to zoom in, like this exists. So this happens throughout. So for those of you with this question, because it was a question that I had at one point in time, this happens throughout this entire leg down. So this entire move down, you will find this happening. It is not going to just happen at the end of it, or it's not just going to happen at the start. Like this happens throughout this entire move. Okay, you need to understand that. So this is a narrative going down. So what we see here is we see the villains bring the narrative down. Buyers then bring it up. They instantly get rejected, and then they set up a camp right here. So at this camp, you can probably already see it with your eyes. At this camp where they had set up camp, a hero boss battle had spawned in right here. How do we know that? Because of the narrative. It is in favor of the villains. So these heroes set up camp here. They then proceed to try to move the narrative up to fight these guys, and they immediately get rejected. But as we come back down, instead of continuing lower like this, right? Because since this narrative is in favor of the villains, they should be able to push these heroes down below their spawn point. Instead of that happening, what happens instead is at that same spawn point, the heroes are able to push past all of those villains literally in one singular candle, in one singular screenshot. They're able to push past them. That is because there is a hero boss fight who is helping these heroes push this up. He is trying to help the heroes hijack the narrative and switch it from a villain narrative to a hero narrative. We can see once these villains had pushed these heroes back down again, look what happened at that same point in time. They immediately get sent away. Not only do they get sent away, the narrative had changed. Why has the narrative changed? I've already taught you before. In a downtrend, we're supposed to make lower lows and lower highs. We make a lower low, lower high, but here we make a higher low. That's already a red flag. There is a higher low here. This isn't a confirmed switch yet though. The heroes at this higher low need to come up and take out a villain camp, which we can see that they were able to do right here. They were able to come up and take out this camp of villains. So since they were able to come up and take out this camp of villains, when the new camp of villains spawn in, which we can see happen here, right? We can see happen right here. They're going to want to get revenge on these heroes for taking out these villains here. So we want to see them push the narrative back down to take them out. And if they failed to do so, and instead the heroes hijack the narrative and move it back up and take out that revenge camp, the narrative has switched from a villain narrative to a hero narrative. And anything above that point in time should be only hero narrative based, which we can see it was, right? This continued to go up. You see what I'm saying? So with that context, we were able to see that the narrative did indeed switch, but we're also able to see the support and resistance. There was a hero boss fight that spawned in here inside of this overall villain narrative. And the reason this hero boss fight spawned in is because he's looking to help the heroes switch the overall narrative from a villainous narrative to a hero narrative. Okay? If they are unsuccessful, the villains will spawn in and move below the villains will spawn in somewhere up top and eventually move below that point in time. That never happened though in this example. Instead, the narrative was hijacked and the guys that were looking to get revenge were completely stomped on. And if the guys who are looking to get revenge get stomped on, you can bet your ass anybody else who is looking to get revenge is going to get stomped on. The narrative has been hijacked. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so that's how we find support and resistance on both sides, and that's how you use it. Now, once again, in the final video, we're going to wrap all of this together and figure out how to take a trade with all the information and the context. But for right now, you just need to understand how to spot this on a chart. Okay, so you should literally be able to see this with your eyes. The first thing you want to do when you start out is find the overall narrative. Okay, just mark up the overall narrative. So at this point in time, what's happening? Okay, I don't know what just happened. Hold on one second, guys. So at this point in time, if I was looking at this chart when I logged on for the day, I'm seeing an overall narrative going down at that point in time, right? I'm looking for any resistance. Currently, do I see any resistance? No, I don't. The only thing I see is a group of heroes who have stepped in, right? And I see that they just took out a group of villains. So that means another group of villains is going to spawn in and look to get revenge, right? And if they fail to do that, then that tells me everything that I need to know, right? In fact, that did happen here. This happened on a lower time frame though. But a group of villains spawned in right here and they looked to get revenge by moving price down. Hence the black screenshot, but they failed to do so, and instead they got moved back up. This was a hijack of narrative that happened here. But how you spot resistance is it's anything that goes against the overall narrative, right? So that higher low appearing in that downtrend, right? Because a downtrend only consists of lower lows and lower highs. A downtrend only consists of lower lows, lower high, lower low, lower high. If we suddenly get a higher low and a higher high, that itself is resistance. So that higher low that forms is a form of resistance. Well, it's support, but it is a form of resistance for the villains. They can't get past that point. Doesn't mean that they can't get past that point. It's just that wasn't supposed to happen. There is some sort of resistance there, right? There's some sort of support here. Something is supporting this spawn point of heroes stepping in here, right? There is either a boss battle that has stepped in right here, or that boss battle stepped in all the way down here at this original low, right? Because heroes sit under lows because they look to take to the skies because they want to go to heaven. So they'll start on the ground. So that boss is either here or here. And we know that because the narrative is an overall down narrative, but suddenly a group of heroes spawn in and they're able to take out a camp of villains, and then a revenge camp steps in, and then the revenge camp gets knocked out as well. So that tells us that there is a hero boss in here helping drive this narrative back up. So what I will tell you to simplify this and write this down is that the only people capable of hijacking a overall narrative is a boss battle. Okay, write that down. The only people of hijacking an overall narrative is a boss battle. If you suddenly see the narrative start to change, understand that there is a boss battle sitting below some kind of low or above some kind of high, depending on what kind of narrative it is. And they are trying to help that group of heroes or villains change the narrative. You must understand, and write this down as well, you must understand that the boss battle himself, he is a player in the game. He can still be defeated, right? But he has a lot of influence and he is able to change the game rules because he don't play by the same rule book as me or you. He has more influence than me or you. He can change the rule book. He's fucking awesome, okay? Just like he's fucking awesome. Just understand that. So if you're able to see where he is, get on his team. Okay? It's as simple as that. So that is support and resistance. I've been recording for 40 minutes. So I'm going to take a quick break and then we're going to come back and talk about volume profile. Real quick, run you through what volume profile is. Volume profile is just, it is the best way I could describe it in video game terms, is it is just a map showing you where the boss dungeons are at. It is, in fact, it is a map showing you potentially, underline that word, a volume profile is a map that is showing you where potential boss fights are sitting at, okay? So when I come back, we're going to talk about volume profile, okay?